it need not necessarily be believed that he was out of favor with nature, nor that he remembered especially those portraits published of him which depicted a countenance in harmony with the actions attributed to him. One of his friends wrote, Sir Hudson Lowe was rather below medium build, not endowed with great power, but versatile. His forehead was wide and a little high, the back of his head broad, his eyes sunk in their sockets, in lowering his eyebrows very long and thick, his nose rather aquiline, his upper lip projecting, his chin pointed. He had a high color, and his hair was fair. He held his head high and never, even at 77, had any tendency to stoop. His gait, his movements were usually rapid, sometimes abrupt. While talking, he often had difficulty in expressing himself, and in society he alternated between extreme taciturnity and vehement animation. He had further enjoyed amorous conquests. A liaison formed in the Mediterranean lands had produced 2 legitimate children, and of Lady Lowe he had at St. Helena 2 sons and 2 daughters. He was then neither a monster nor a grey beard, and he must be painted as he was. He was above all, and far be it from us to reproach him for this, a loyal Briton, a Briton who was, in commanding foreigners, all the more convinced of the preeminence not only of England over all nations, but of the Englishman over any individual of any other nationality. Nationality is not even the right word. The Irish to him were not English. He was a worshipper of the hierarchy, the first rung up the ladder of which he had attained, and where, very high on a rung, he would never reach. Titled men and women hovered. He did not envy them, nor was he jealous of them. He boasted of it and was proud of it, and by that admirable national sentiment which was found among all Englishmen, he elevated himself to the plane and prided himself that there were in his country such beings with whom he could associate, firstly by his nationality, and then by his rank, and finally, above all, by his knighthood. He was indifferent to everything foreign, attaching no importance to it, scarcely recognizing it. There was England, the King of England, the peers of the United Kingdom in order precedence, bearers of titles, holders of posts, according to their hierarchy. And then, afar off and very lowly, there were dynastic and loyalist foreigners, emperors, kings, princes, all of whom he regarded more or less as English mercenaries. As to the French, he very naturally put them behind other people, and it was not his fault that he did so. The man had double, triple blinkers. Nothing could lift them for him. Nothing could make him other than what he was. He had quality, reading, character, education, even the scribbling mania of an adjutant order bearer, and England had made a lieutenant colonel of him to appoint him as the emperor's jailer. Everything arose from that fact, from those different elements which constituted his mentality, formed his character. In his home and his private life he was, as his defenders say, probably an excellent man, though frightfully tiresome. He had some virtues, and in a high degree those in particular which constitute a perfect subaltern. He made a religion of military duty, was always ready and assiduous, lived only for duty, and had dreamed of it to such an extent that he had lost his head over it. He was not responsible for this duty, but he had given his word to carry it out, and he's discharged it. Once or twice he took the responsibility for procrastination, and on his part it was the triumph of a gentleman's conscience over a soldier's conscience. He blushed for his superiors and the orders they gave him for their meanness and villainy, but with these exceptions he introduced into his life a stiffness, a lack of formality, an absence of manners, and ignorance of who his prisoner was, all of which seemed just so many insults. He was certainly not du monde. The theory was not Hudson Lowe's, but the English ministry's. The practice was Lowe's, and that was enough. But the ministry knew whom it had got hold of. It had selected Lowe out of them, all because Lowe was a man such as they knew he would remain, and nothing would change him. It had constantly approved of Lowe's sort it had expressly advised him to live so. Not once during 5 years did it rebuke him for exceeding his orders. On the contrary, it reprimanded him with extreme severity for not displaying sufficient strictness and for showing undue consideration in giving Hudson Lowe a major part. The story of the captivity had been falsified, and to this end the emperor, his companion, and French writers united in their efforts with the English ministers and writers. Every kind of hatred was heaped upon Hudson Lowe, and he has been depicted entirely different to what he was. The French of St. Helena were sensible of only him in every instant, suffering his inquisition, being the objects of his feverish anxiety, suffering through him, and attributing to him the persecutions of which they were the victims. The English ministers, for their part, thrust upon this man who possessed nothing, who had neither name nor fortune, and whom they crushed like a disused instrument, the responsibility for the orders which they gave him. It suited British historians to sacrifice an obscure citizen to save the reputation of the dynasty, the administration, and the nation. Low was the result. The result was given prominence, and so the cause was buried in obscurity. Had the cause been disclosed, the struggle would have been worthwhile relating, not that pitiful struggle which humbled the Emperor Napoleon the Great to the level of this poor devil, the colonel of the Royal Corsican Rangers, but the epic struggle which ennobled and elevated him who attempted it, a struggle which lasted 25 years, and the last episode of which was taking place with Napoleon, champion of France, and the Revolution alone dying, having no communication with the outside world, without any news of those whom he loved more than life itself, with nothing to hope for but death, held in judgment by the European oligarchy, of whom the English oligarchs were appointed executioners. The commissioners. Europe had to have a hand in the sacrifice, if only by means of delegates. This was what she had agreed to do in accordance with the treaties of August 2nd, 1815, Article 3, of which read, the Imperial Courts of Austria and Russia and the Royal Court of Prussia shall appoint commissioners who shall live in the place chosen by the government of His Britannic Majesty for the abode of Napoleon Bonaparte, and who, without being responsible for his custody, shall assure themselves of his presence. And Article 4, His Most Christian Majesty shall be invited in the name of the four courts aforementioned to send a commissioner to the place of Napoleon's confinement, England, who had sheltered behind Europe, to violate its own laws, and with hypocrisy to maintain every appearance of generosity, hospitality, and liberalism. England, who through Lord Castlereagh had suggested that Europe, in relinquishing the custody of Napoleon to her, should all the same be able to adopt a certain superintendence over him, but was by no means anxious, having gained her point that Europe should share her arrangements regarding the prisoner. Even before Napoleon was in her hands, Lord Liverpool wrote to Lord Castlereagh on July 15th, in the matter of where we shall take him, we would prefer that there were no commissioners there appointed by the other powers, but that he should be entirely handed over to our own discretion. On the 21st, he wrote, we are extremely reluctant to allow commissioners from the other powers. Such an arrangement could be permitted for a few months, but when such personages reside in a place where they have nothing to do, they soon become bored, more often than not quarrel among themselves, and this wrangling can become seriously embarrassing to the prisoner's official guard. The idea of commissioners having been suggested in the first instant by Castlereagh himself, he had to admit upon consideration that they might give rise to many objections, but was awkwardly placed to abolish them now. Liverpool then suggested that to safeguard the principle and at the same time to the allied powers to practice economy, it would be simple by means of a mutual arrangement to send a commissioner in turn for 1 year, thus giving less bother and producing less intrigue than 3 or 4. The principle of sending commissioners was nevertheless adopted on July 28th by the delegates of the four powers, Austria, Great Britain, Prussia, and Russia. The Conference of Four which then decreed the fate of France. And Lord Castlereagh made no fuss of signing the Convention of April 2nd, 4 days later. It is true that Lord Liverpool immediately drew this conclusion from it, that Napoleon, being Europe's prisoner, Europe must contribute to his custody and maintenance, that both would cost a lot, 3 millions or close on for military and civil expenses alone, and more than 3 millions for the squadron, total 300,000 sterling, about 7,500,000 francs, not counting his upkeep. This was money, and if the Emperor of Russia had not hesitated to pay his share, the King of Prussia would certainly have refused his. Blue Shirt, having suggested far more expeditious means of settling it. Lord Liverpool did not, however, carry into effect his threat to make it a subject to negotiation. He would have had too much to lose by it, as much by the loss of prestige and by the inevitable complications which would arise from the control and settling of the costs, the endeavors of them all to ensure the custody of the captive. A rivalry over the influence and even precedence. He therefore submitted to commissioners, but he found every opportune the determination of the King of Prussia not to maintain one, and according as one of the three powers recalled its commissioner, he took care not to insist that he should be replaced. For the moment, Russia, Austria, and the King of France did not fail to make use of a right which put a seal upon their triumph. It was not that the Emperor of Russia might decide to intervene to obtain more favorable treatment for the man to whom he had so often sworn friendship. It was not that he claimed to be regularly responsible for his physical needs, his moral sufferings, to assist the former and alleviate the latter, but he expected to have at St. Helena someone to listen and observe, someone who might report to him the least gesture which the prisoner made to overcome his weariness. At the moment when the deer had been taken to the trap and shut up in an iron cage, was it not necessary to set someone to record his struggles, his violence, his cries, his appeals? No pity, but the insulting joy of finding crushed, overwhelmed, miserable, and lamenting he whom the world had seen supreme, glorious, and dreaded, and of whom it had such fear. The man whom the Emperor Alexander chose to send to St. Helena was named Alexander Antonovich Bellman, who was descended from a family of Ramsay of Bellman, the male line being extinct in Scotland on February 21st, 1806, by the death of Sir Alexander Ramsay of Bellman, 6th part, and member of Parliament. But a branch of it was perpetuated by him who, having remained faithful to James II, had accompanied him in his banishment, and of which one member was at Constantinople, whence he crossed later into Russia with Bruce, and was destined for such success. Bogdan Andrianovich Ramsay de Bellman, the first one to enter the Russian service, attained the rank of colonel in command of the regiment of the Trinity, and was killed at the Battle of Wilhelmstrasse, 1771. He seemed to have taken the title of Count, a title of Count Holderness, created in 1621 by James I of England, James VI of Scotland, in the interest of James Ramsay. His old page was recognized in the Ramsay family, but this title became extinct in 1625 by the death without heir of the James, whose one brother was created a baronet only the same year, and the Russian branch was not even any relation to the latter. Antoine, the son of Bogdan, was Governor General of Kursk and Ural, and took a distinguished part in the Caucasian Wars, because upon his death in 1790, the Empress Catherine endowed his widow with a substantial annuity and several thousand tithes of land. Alexander Antonovich was then 9 years old. He was promoted standard bearer, enrolled in a cavalry regiment of the Guard, and appointed to a cadet corps until the completion of his studies. The Empress also appointed his brother Carl a cadet, known later for his extraordinary courage and his worldly successes, who, riddled with wounds, died at the age of 26, a major general. His third brother became one of the pages, and his two sisters, the elder of whom was Lady of Honor to Her Majesty, were sent at the treasury's expense to a monastery. Alexander Antonovich was second captain in a cavalry regiment of the Guard. Within the month of March 1801, having accompanied a comrade making whoopee, he struck a police officer in the face. The Emperor Paul ordered him to be reduced to the ranks, deprived of all the rights and nobility, and enrolled enrolled as an ordinary soldier in an infantry regiment in barracks at Petersburg. He spent only 3 days there. The Emperor Paul, having been killed on March 23rd, the first care of the Emperor Alexander was to reverse all the decisions taken by his late father. Nevertheless, the 3 days Balmain had spent in the infantry barracks had disgusted him with military service, and he hastened to quit it. On August 20th, 1801, he entered the Department of Foreign Affairs and was at first attached to the legation of the King of Sardinia, whence he went on January 3rd, 1803, to the King of Naples. On June 30th, 1810, he was appointed secretary of an embassy to Vienna. In 1812, after the commencement of hostilities, he was sent on a secret mission to Graz and Trieste, and after the crossing of the Niemen by the French to Prague, Carlsbad, and Dresden, on October 3rd, he was appointed secretary of an embassy to London. On March 23rd, 1813, he resumed military service with the rank of lieutenant colonel and left London with dispatches for the imperial headquarters at Dresden. Until the armistice, he was in the advance guard of the forces commanded by General Valmeden, and transferred to the army of the Prince of Sweden, and participated in the battles of Grossbeeren, Wittenberg, and Tenwitz, for which he was decorated with the Order of St. Vladimir, 4th class, with a ribbon. In September, attached to Chernichev, he took part under Colonel de Benkendorf in the Castle of Frey, which won for him the Cross of St. Anne, 2nd class. He accompanied Chernichev in the pursuit of the French army as far as the Rhine, and was then entrusted with certain missions to Vincent and Bernadotte, who conferred on him the Order of the Sword. But he fell seriously ill at Brem, and when on March 1st, 1814, completely restored to health, he tried to rejoin the detachment of General Count Vorontsov. He failed because the communications were broken off by the French. He therefore had to remain at Nancy until the Allied entry into Paris. On April 4th, he went to announce to the French government the surrender of the fortresses of Metz and Luxembourg, which secured for him from the King of Prussia the Order of Merit. On June 11th, 1815, he was, by order of the Emperor, sent to the Duke of Wellington, with whom he remained until the second occupation of Paris, whereupon he carried out, not without danger, several important missions which testified to the complete confidence his sovereign had in him, to the exclusion of his superiors. He was at various occasions chosen on account of his tremendous energy and preciseness, his intelligence, and his tact, but in selecting him for St. Helena, the Emperor Alexander showed even more clearly that he valued him, but for different reasons. Balmain was a witty man. Under the Russian uniform, he reserved a certain amount of Scottish humor, and the amusing fancies which he now and then slipped into his official dispatches highly entertained the staff of Foreign Affairs. He was the lion of drawing rooms where women surrounded him because he excelled in making the foolish laugh and in reducing them to hysterics. These subjects which he had to handle certainly needed a cheerful guise, and he was expected to present them, underlying the picturesque and inserting details to make the august recipient laugh. Unfortunately for the chronicle, Count Balmain found at St. Helena allurements which caused him gradually to lose sight of the object of his mission. He was uninterested to the extent that he finished by marrying Miss Johnson, the elder, who was in the favor also of Emperor Alexander, he being full of attention towards her as well as towards her stepfather. Sir Hudson Lowe, Count Balmain, had not been favored in the matter of salary. Actually, no account was taken, either in Petersburg, Vienna, or Paris, of the sum to be given to the agents sent to St. Helena. The imperial ministry considered themselves generous in granting 1,200 sterling and 2,000 ducats for traveling expenses. From the very first, Balmain proved that he could not live on this sum and requested to be recalled. His debts amounting to 1,000 at the end of a year, his sovereign then granted him an annual salary of 2,000 pounds and a sum of 1,600 pounds to pay off the arrears. He said he was satisfied,